Hello and welcome. I am Katie Spencer and I'm with my co-host Nikki Cottom. Nikki, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. I'm so glad that we get to discuss something a little bit deep and also transformative and enriching for our faith and our testimony of Jesus Christ.
I love it. I think we talk deep on almost every podcast, but I think that's kind of who you and I are, right? I know that Nikki and I have been we have some time to discuss what's going on in the world, what's going on in our lives and ultimately how we can better a relationship with Jesus Christ, right? And really know who we are to our core identity through his eyes. I know right now in the world, things seem to be pretty divided. Like I don't even know in how many years back, there just seems to be a greater divide happening. Like people across the board just are a little lost. And I don't want to say lost necessarily, but just that there just seems to be a division that is dividing people in all aspects in homes and families in workplaces and in different belief systems through governments. And it seems to be stemming a lot of distrust and hatred and negativity in the world. And it can seem a little heavy. Um, it's not sometimes fun, right? I don't like living in a place where I feel like I have to walk on eggshells sometimes because I'm just so concerned about the outcome of things that I believe in and how somebody might take offense of the things that I'm feeling. It's crazy the division and where things are, right? But I think that Nikki and I want to take a new outlook on some different ways of division that will help us maybe look within ourselves. That even though we come across division in the world, we can be solid in who we are, and where we stand and take that solid identity of who we are, what we believe, and a connection to God into the world and try and maybe ease the discomfort of the division that is so around us. So, Nikki, why don't you introduce what we want to start talking about?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Katie, for introducing the fact that we feel divided sometimes as children of God. And sometimes it's because we are confused. We are feeling a little bit lost about our identity or about where we're headed. There's a lot of this, should we follow God or should we follow the government? Should we listen to God's voice? Should we listen to other people who we've always followed, we've always believed in? And how we can really find that unity and that connection in Jesus Christ in the areas that matter most. So, we are going to talk today about this complex that has been talked about in general for a while, but it's kind of hard for some people to swallow this idea because it really pushes against what we've always done in the past. It pushes against our normal way of thinking about different organizations, about things that we give our free will to unintentionally, or maybe we feel like it's a valid enough reason to give our free will. And so we're going to talk about this Christ versus Caesar complex, okay? And this is introduced in the book of Matthew in the New Testament in chapter 22, where Jesus, this is the week that he's about to be crucified and go through the Passover as the Passover lamb and to atone for all mankind. And so, in the days leading up to the Passover, he speaks in a series of parables. And this parable that he speaks, I did actually want to mention the parable that Jesus opens with before these Pharisees try to come in and attack him and try to trick him with this Christ versus Caesar complex. So Jesus gives the parable of a certain king who's making a marriage for his son. And so he calls all his servants to come to the wedding and nobody would come. And somebody's like, "Well, I've prepared my own dinner or I've got this other thing going on." And the king got angry with them because those are the people who should have come, right? Those are the people God's like, "Come." And they're like, "No, I've got other things." So if we look at that as being Jesus calling us to come and we say, "No, we've got this other responsibility, we've got this other thing going on," then what's going to happen? They're not going to come to the feast of the Lord. Okay, this is also in around the same time frame that he talks about the 10 virgins. 5 who enter into this feast and 5 who don't. But in this particular one, they weren't actually his servants, right? They were pretending, they were going through the motions of being his servants. But when it came down to this beautiful wedding, the servants were like, yeah, peace out. I'm not in it for this. Goes contrary to what I want. And so then what he does is he goes and he commands these other people to go to the highways and gather as many people as they can find. People off the streets, people in their working in their gardens, whatever, just gather them in. And as many people as came, he clothed them in the wedding garments and he brought them in to this beautiful feast that he had prepared in this beautiful wedding for his son. And then he says, there are many called, but few are chosen. After he gives this parable, then the Pharisees are thinking, oh, now we've got to trick him, we've got to trap him. They want to know where his allegiance lies, right? And so they ask him and they say, Master, we know that thou art true and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. See, they're trying to lay a trap for him. Like, you don't really care about it, subscribing to any specific person, right? And then they ask him, Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute or pay your taxes unto Caesar or not? Okay, and then Jesus, of course, he knows where they're going, and calls them wicked hypocrites and says, "Why are you tempting me?" And he says, "Okay, give me some of this tribute money." And they brought him a penny, and he says, "And whose image and superscription is on here?" They said, "It's Caesar's." And then Jesus said, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." And they had no words, and then they, they separated. They couldn't figure out what he meant by that. I love this principle because right after these people were talking, listening to Jesus talk about this parable, where there are so many people who profess to be worshiping this king or following this king, and then when it really matters, they don't show up. They're like, that's just gonna take a lot of time and effort." And so the Lord says, "Fine, you were originally called, but you can't be chosen because you didn't even participate." And then he gathers everybody else. And that just shows me who Jesus is. He says, yes, there are going to be these people who are naturally closer, who maybe look the part and who are there. But Jesus doesn't discriminate against the people who were his servants and the people in the highways. Yes, he intended to invite these servants first, but they weren't going to make it. But he didn't stop at that. He invited everybody else to come. And think that goes along with the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Those people who are often overlooked or who feel overlooked by Jesus or by God in any regard, those are the people who God has a really, really soft spot for. Those are the people he's really going to go out into the fields and the valleys, and he's going to find them and he's going to bring them in. So, Katie, what are some of your impressions as we've been talking about the initial part of this topic?
Well, I love how you lay out the way that God looks at and feels, right? That he loves ultimately all. There is no one that will be cast out from his love. He is welcoming to all, right? What I find interesting is the beginning of the story, how all of those that were invited didn't come, right? Like, here it is. He's put it out there. They profess to be these righteous people, and yet, how are they missing this beautiful invitation from God? And like saying that out loud, it's like, oh, maybe a thought of my own, like, oh, how many times do you think that God's put an invitation out to me that I missed? Right? Because I don't think that those people that didn't come didn't want to be with God. I think maybe they were just caught up in other priorities, right? That was the whole thing. Oh, I've got this, I've got that. And then they didn't realize they were missing out in that moment, right? And so kind of relating that to myself, it's kind of a, whoa, wait. if I believe in God and that He loves me and that He's always there, I bet I've been missing some invitations.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely times in my life where I've felt sorry for myself or I've been too overwhelmed to hear God's voice. And then I just feel miserable. I'm like, why am I so miserable? Well, how well am I doing at enjoying the joy of the Lord and his feast? Am I really showing up for that? Am I showing up for that feast in my scripture study, in my prayer? Am I showing up for that feast in participating in all the joy and all the opportunities to grow and develop? And so, yeah, I think it's really, really true that we do get caught up in the stuff, right? The stuff of life. Then we talk about this comparison with Christ versus Caesar, right? The Caesar stuff, that's stuff, right? That is carnal, temporal. Nothing about it is eternal. Think about empires, they just fall. One thing that's guaranteed to happen to any empire is that it's going to fall because an empire is set up for self gain, all about control, all about manipulation of other people. There's very little personal growth, development, and innate success that God has programmed us to receive. So the difference is pretty startling, but we currently live in a world that is very empire focused, that is very Caesar related. Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the main differences between empire perspective and kingdom, or the kingdom of Jesus Christ perspective on this earth? Because like we were talking about before this meeting, we were talking about how some of these are actually triggers. And these things are going to trigger you a little bit. So, for those listening, just be in a state of humility, not toward me, but toward Jesus. Just be in a state of humility and just listen. Whatever nugget Jesus wants you to hear today, that's what I want you to hear today. So, thank you, Katie.
Yeah, no problem. So, part of the discussion that Nikki and I are talking about today comes from Jamie Winship's new book. We talked about Jamie Winship at the beginning of our podcast in his book Living Fearless. And he came out with a new book recently, and it's called The War of Worldviews: Choosing Connection in a Culture of Separation. So this is what the book looks like. You can find it on Amazon and all of the other local bookstores, I think. And so we're going to use his wording to help us kind of describe a little bit more about these two different worldviews, right? And what we talked about, the Jesus view, or the kingdom of God, versus the empire, or what we basically live in right now. Reading this, he talks about the separation worldview is basically the worldly view, and he breaks it down into 4 different categories. Category number 1 is a scarcity mindset. We've talked about this in the past, right? In the law of opposition, scarcity would be the opposite of abundance. And so scarcity is limiting. It's going to pull back. You're going to limit what could come to you when you hold on to that scarcity mentality, right? Number 2 would be certainty. Certainty, another word I like to use that is quite popular in my vocabulary, is control. I have always been a very anxious person. Digging deeper into why am I anxious is because I like control. I like to control my outcome. I like to control the situation. I like to know information so that I can be prepared for what's to come. I am very uncomfortable in unexpected. So certainty mentality is exactly that. And you base on that. The next step would be perfectionism. I think you guys have probably, if you've listened to past episodes, you may have heard me say that I'm an overcoming perfectionist, right? That has been something I've struggled with. I'm not quite sure when, but as a child, I really felt that pressure of needing to be perfect. It limits you because you view mistakes and failure as punishment or not being good enough. All of those kind of things. So if you listen to these words of scarcity, certainty, control, perfectionism, the last one is self-interest or self-promoting, worrying about you first over everything else, right? Can you hear that limiting in it? It's really boxing things in, right? It's really kind of putting you in a space of, well, if I can control it, or this could be the outcome, it's limiting into a man's mind what you are knowledgeable in, or what you might think the outcome could be in. And truly understanding God, you can see that all of those aspects really don't support his style of life, right?
Mhm.
They sound harsh, like these are kind of some harsh words. Um, but I wonder if you really ponder, hey, how many of you in the audience have felt this in your life, right? Because a lot of those lead to fear, and fear being the catalyst of why we perform or behave or respond or don't respond to certain things in our lives.
Yeah.
So these are some pretty big things, right? And I think part of the world is experiencing all of this,
Yes.
right? Again, this isn't, when we talk about these feelings or these thoughts, this isn't a good or a bad, a negative, a positive. These are experiences, but it's how we approach them, how long we choose to sit with them, that really can be the important aspect. Because sitting in these things, or for me, when I was reading, I was telling Nikki, this was kind of a gut punch of, oh my goodness, I really live in these categories. Maybe not so much to self promote. I think I like to serve others and do, but I wonder if my fear of failing actually limits me from being able to serve others fully. Like, I've grown up my whole life being taught the gospel of Jesus Christ and choosing actively to be a disciple of him, to go out and to speak and to manifest and to teach and try to live my life in a manner that emulates him.
Mm,
And
yeah.
and then I'm reading this book, Nikki, and all of these things are coming up, and I'm like, wait, if these are really big factors in my life, and this is of the world and not of God's way, somehow I'm missing something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. And I'm glad you bring that up. And I'm glad you bring up your feelings related to this because until we look at it in the face, they're like, oh, wait a minute. You mean that certain organizations that we subscribe to and follow, not just the government, but other ones, maybe even religious, uh, can fall in this category of needing control and being more about control instead of less about the freedom to really plug in to divine inspiration and things like that. I think one thing that came to my mind as you were talking was when Jesus lays out the first two great commandments, right? The first two great commandments is first of all to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy might and with all thy soul. And then the second one is love thy neighbor as thyself. So if we look at those four things, if we look at scarcity, is that following either of those commandments?
No,
No, because God is a God of abundance. There's no scarcity in him. He is the polar opposite of scarcity. Abundance is from God. And when we are plugged into scarcity, that actually puts us on this polarity spectrum, pushing ourselves away from God. And it puts us in this place where our receiving vessel is like a little beaker bottle. And we say, you can give me stuff, but it's got to fit in this little tiny hole. It's got to fit in this one way of doing things, right? That scarcity mentality is so sabotaging because God really wants to pour all the goodness of the universe into us. And we've got this little teeny tiny container that we will allow it to fit in. So being aware of that is really powerful because it allows you to say, well, maybe I should expand my receiving vessel. What if I widened it a little bit more? What if I allowed God to speak something to me that was outside the normal narrative, that was outside of this framework of control and certainty? What if I just laid back and let God just tell me whatever it is he wants to tell me? How empowering would that be? That'd be so glorious. And it goes back to trust. So if any of you are thinking, yeah, well, what if God tells me something that I can't do, that I just absolutely cannot do? I can't do it. Do you trust God? That's what it boils down to. I'm not going to pretend I know everything God's going to tell you, but I can promise you that whatever God tells you is beautiful and it's amazing. And there is nothing wrong with it if it's from God. It might not be the same thing he tells me, but that's okay. We're on two different trajectories of life. And hopefully, the reason you're listening to this is because you want to get closer to God. So let's look at the second one, certainty and control versus this mystery and curiosity. Now, certainty is nice because if we can say, okay, I want this specific thing, so I'm going to do this specific thing to get it, it really limits that abundance. Like, I think that falls in that scarcity category as well, because when we need to be certain about something, we're going to wait, we're going to procrastinate, we're going to postpone, we're going to second guess, we're going to overthink, and how often does overthinking actually help us move forward? How often does knowing the outcome perfectly help us actually to manifest what we want? It doesn't. And so I love the terminology Katie mentioned that Jamie mentions in his book. This mystery and this curiosity is on the opposite end of this polarity. So if I look into weird habit that my husband has. And I'm like, I want to control this habit. I am so annoyed by it. I could lean the other way and say, I wonder why. I wonder why that habit's showing up. Like, that's curious. Maybe I could ask God about it. And I can guarantee you, if you really understand why that's happening, there's going to be a greater love. And then that habit doesn't even matter anymore.
I love that.
That is God's power. Like, that is the abundance. Is it's not just cut and dry. You need to control. And then going back to the third one, perfectionism. Perfectionism, I love the word perfect, but I think I love the word perfect because I take it in a context of Jesus saying, "Be ye therefore perfect." And to me, perfect means to fill the measure of my creation. That's what perfect means. Because when Jesus says Adam was perfect, when Jesus says Abraham was perfect, we know for a fact there were things that they did, right? There were things off the top that I know Abraham did that I wouldn't do. And yet the Lord called him perfect. And the perfect came by living the measure of his creation. So if I am living the measure of my creation, is being a perfectionist part of that? No. So do you see the difference between that? I cannot live the measure of my creation if I'm over focused on perfectionism that goes back to that certainty. I can only take this action if I know the outcome's going to be perfect. It doesn't allow for growth. It doesn't allow for that line upon line, that glory upon glory that Jesus went through to become the Son of God. So for us, being able to lean into that failability, say, you know what? I failed, but how does Jesus treat those who fail? How did he treat the man who whose friends had to drop him down from the ceiling so that he could get healed and he forgave him of his sins? How does Jesus take into account those who fail? He says, "Come to me." That's who I want. I want those of you who know you can't do it alone, and that's the whole purpose of me coming and providing all this for you so that you can return no matter how many times you fail. I'm not going to count. I'm not going to play this game where I'm taking a tally of all the things you do wrong. Like, that's not of God. God has all this love and he's got all this compassion. That's what makes Jesus Jesus. So when we allow ourselves to let go of the perfectionism and say, I'm allowed to fail. And I want you to talk about this too, Katie. I want you to talk because I think this was a really powerful moment for you. If you don't mind sharing, it was a vulnerable experience. If you don't have to share it if you don't want to, but I thought it was really powerful when you were kind of in a low time emotionally and you came to this realization of what failure really means.
Yeah. So like I said, perfectionism has been something that I have struggled with from a very young age, the anxiety, the pressure, and it has been very limiting, right? It's almost that if I can't do it right, why even try? Why even do? So it wasn't a momentum energy. it was a stagnant energy, it was a hold back energy. And so being able to speak it now and see things, I can see that that's not the energy of God. That's an energy of a being that wants me to stay stagnant and not prosper and grow. So I can see much more clearly now, that the Lord works with us in our own time, on our own journey when we're ready to make that change. He's the one willing to be there, right? Like Nikki said, maybe me opening up my ability to receive from him helps me so that I can actually step into these scary places of just what's uncomfortable, right? This whole process has been very enlightening to me because I am approaching my life in more of a curious mentality of being open to the idea of not what I think that God's capable of, but really being able to be open to say, wow, show me what it is that you have. And that is a very vulnerable place to be, especially from someone with so many years of wanting to control, right? Learning how to let go and fully trust. It's, we've talked about, like, yes, we want to trust, but then actually applying it into our lives. Being a supporter for others is great, but being that vulnerable for yourself. And so for me, failure has been, I don't the only word I can think of right now is more of a punishment. That when I failed, I just felt awful. I felt guilty. I felt less than. Um, all the negative vibrations, all of those things. And I just thought, oh my gosh, like I am just not succeeding. What is the point? Again, going back with these patterns, what is the point? Why do you even keep trying? Just live in this contentment of where I am. Because there can be heartache and other emotions that we don't want to feel when the failure was coming up. So why would I continuously try, fail, and put myself in what just felt this downward spiral all the time?
Mhm.
But I'm on a journey and God's walking with me. So just recently it was reiterated to me reading and studying this book. And then we've talked a little bit about human design and in my chart of who I am and understanding truly what my identity is that God has given me, that He's the one that is telling me. Failure is actually all about learning. It's about experiences, right? One of the things I said is that perfectionism would sometimes make me stagnant. But failure is an opportunity in which that I could then turn to God, or I could um, look back and reassess and address and say, okay, well, then what needs to change? It's momentum, it's moving. And it actually gives me the experiences in life that I can learn and build upon. So for me, my enlightening moment recently has been that failure does not equal punishment or damnation or anything else, but failure actually means success. And that was a really hard thing to like try. And I'm still on the reprogramming in my mind because it's years of development. But that failure equals success because it's moving me forward on my journey of my life experiences so that as I learn and grow from my mistakes, I can better move forward. And not only for myself, but that I can then teach others from my experiences.
Oh. Thank you so much, Katie. That's beautiful that you shared your background and growing up and how you used to interpret failure as damnation. And now you're able to look at failure as part of the success journey. So at each step of failure, you are succeeding. I think of Thomas Edison, right? How many failures did he have before he created the light bulb he was going for? It was thousands, right? And so if we look at it as we are tapping into our divine light and we're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, that is the plan of Jesus. So that we can make those mistakes and he's always going to be there for us. It doesn't mean we willy nilly just say, oh, it doesn't matter what I do because Jesus is going to forgive me, right? Just like the lady who was taken in adultery that we talked about before. Jesus says, Do better. Like, I'm gonna forgive you, but please do better. Stay with me. Stay with me. I'll keep forgiving you. You stay with me. Let's do this together, not separate, right? He was tapping into this connection worldview. And I definitely have had experiences where I have wandered off off this path I should have been on, and then I felt bad about it. And I've come to Jesus and I've said, "Okay, Jesus, I'm so sorry. I kind of in my heart knew that wasn't the right path to go. And now I'm seeing that I need to get back on track." And you know what Jesus has told me when I've come to him? He says, "I'm proud of you for the number of times you keep coming back." He says, "That's what I'm most proud of you, is not that you do everything in a perfectionistic way, but that you keep coming back. You keep getting back on track with my plan for you. And I'm really proud of you for that." And that brought me so much hope in the future and so much joy because Jesus isn't up there blaming and calculating sin and punishment upon our heads. He's with us at our side saying, "Let's go this way." And we're saying, "No, I want to go this way." Well, when we realize that, when we realize where we may have gone off, he said one thing and we were doing another, when we come back, he's not gonna shame us. He says, "Oh, it's so good to be with you again. It's so good to be walking this path together and have an awareness of me with you." That is beautiful. And I really love that too with this whole concept of scarcity and abundance in Jamie's book. Because this last one is that we wanted to talk about is the self promotion and self protection versus being other focused. And other focused, you could call it servant leadership, you could call it um, being more selfless. But self promotion means you look after number one, right? You look after number one above all else. Ego ranks at the top. You're concerned about your survival, about where to go. You're concerned about getting above somebody else, gaining prestige that you can kind of show off, right? That's what we're talking about with this self promotion. If you look at it in a sense of, let's say, most constructs in our empire constructed world that we live in, there's a lot of that, right? Get to the top as fast as possible. Step on anybody who's in your way. Oh, if somebody gets in your way, well, cut them off. Retaliate. You've got to have the upper hand. And that is so contrary to Jesus. That's so contrary to how he operates. When he is always operating from looking at our highest good and saying, "How can I help this person? How can I help my father's children to be successful?" Because that's going to bring me joy. So I love this. I love this idea. And as I'm reading these things off, I'm also thinking about Jesus. And if you think about how Jesus lived, Jesus, he didn't worry about what his next meal was going to be. He didn't draw into the scarcity mentality. In fact, I think of when he fasted for 40 days and those big temptations from Satan came through, and they were tempting him against these things, right? Tempting him with wealth, tempting him with im- being immortal, right? Tempting him above having power and prestige. These things that the devil tempted him with are the same things we are tempted with. So as we're going through this, understand Jesus, he gets it because Jesus was born royalty. And you can dive into that. That could be a whole nother topic for another day. But Jesus was born royalty. He was born heir to the throne, the king of Judah, the king of God's people, the greatest kingdom of the earth. He was born as king. And he rejected that worldly position. He rejected that worldly position. He could have had power, he could have had prestige. He gave that up to become who he was meant to. And if Jesus had given into that, he would have become one of those other guys, one of those other kings, right? But he gave that up because his father's calling for him, his identity in his father's plan for him was much higher ranked in his mind. that the wealth of the world didn't phase him. The glory of the world didn't phase him. He focused on other people. He focused on allowing people to fail and to come to him and being those open arms, that holy space of healing that people need. He was focused on other people. So if you think about that trajectory of Jesus's life, if he had succumbed to those more temporal things, his mission and his impact would have been more temporal in nature. But because he focused on the eternal, which is kingdom related or Jesus Christ church related, that is eternal. That is not a temporary thing where you live, you die, well, too bad, it's over. No, Jesus is still talked about thousands of years later. He is the greatest man who ever lived. It's the greatest story that's ever been told, right? And I think tying that in and realizing that Jesus is going to help us in every single one of these steps is empowering, right? This is beautiful.
I love it. I love it. Nikki, as you were talking, I just want to spend a few minutes, I think, um, talking about the abundance that God can give us that might appear worldly, but how we can use these gifts and blessings to stay in that connection worldview of God rather than the separate world. So, what I'm talking about is, you know, you talk about that difference between thinking self and thinking others. Does that mean that if you have a successful business, that you are very wealthy, um, or anything in that regard, that you are worshiping or or falling under the empire mentality, that separate mentality, right? Like this is where I just want to spend a few minutes
Yeah.
on, because I know I don't want people to get in this black and white thinking, right? That if we are successful, if we have a major abundance of what is in this world, that we are part of the world. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say I'm 100% sure Jesus bought things with money. I know it, right? Jesus used money. I also know that Jesus had wealthy friends who contributed to his work on the earth. And I also know that because God is the God of abundance, why should it surprise you when God blesses somebody with money? Right? It's more about using that money as a tool for a greater and higher purpose and saying, no matter whether the money comes or not, I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to worship God. I'm still going to serve God and his children, regardless of what that status looks like, regardless of what the money looks like. It's going to happen. So as you do that, and as you open up your receiving vessel, yes, it could be money, it could be influence. I've got like 33 types of abundance worksheet as part of my Abundance Unplugged course. And there are so many types of abundance. Money is just one of them. One thing that I have thought a lot about is why do we avoid money and let everyone else have money, including our wealthy empires? Why is it that we are not tapping into this partnership with God so the money can be coming to those who are doing amazing things in the world? So, part of what I do in my Abundance Unplugged is I help people to reprogram their mindset around money so that they can see their calling in life as being able to be more impactful, being able to bless more people, being able to bring a healing and abundance and prosperity to other people. But one thing that has thrown us off for generations and centuries have been these old ways of looking at things in a Puritanism perspective, in a Church of England perspective. We have all these generational patterns of denial of money, these ideas of money is the root of all evil. No, 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 it's not. The love of money, which means the focus on that goes into this scarcity, right? If you're chasing something, it means you don't have faith that's just going to come to you, right? And it does fall under that self promotion area, right? So it's not money itself. Money is just a tool. In fact, there's this one scripture where Jesus is with his disciples and a couple of them are falling short on their taxes. Right? They're like, the collectors are coming. They're like, what do we do? And he says, well, let's draw a fish out of the water. And they do. And it's the exact amount of money they needed to pay their taxes and continue on the work. Right? It just works. But it doesn't involve chasing it, right? Chasing something shows that there's a scarcity behind it. So if you can look at it as everything that I need for here and now, I already have. So I'm going to celebrate that. And I'm going to focus on widening my vessel to receive. Then whether it shows up in the form of money, a spontaneous opportunity, or something else, we're going to see God's hand. And we're going to celebrate whatever tool that is that we're given and not worship the money itself. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you. Well, and I think that that's the key, right? Is where is the focus? Because we have so many gifts. I mean, throughout all of mankind, each of us has so many gifts and abilities and connections that can be used so differently in bringing about the kingdom of God, right? And I think that that's really that mentality and that idea is we are taking those gifts and those talents that we have, seeking the wisdom of God on how to utilize that. He will line things up. He will bless us in so many different ways. There's so many things, Nikki, through this discussion that this idea of black and white thinking and really learning how to walk away from black and white and live in those gray areas of what is possible. How could it be different than what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, what I've imagined, right? What are other doors that could possibly be opened with that curiosity and that trust that God will always have enough. Whatever that enough is, he will have it and he will provide. And it's us actively seeking and being open to receive, right? Widening that hole of where we're allowing him because we're the ones actually with the power to block him
Yeah.
from all that he has, and having that awareness to open that up with curiosity, with that mystery of allowing that to come in, and then truly embracing it, trying and failing, and then redirecting, right? But it leads, his worldview of this connection is really about connecting with him through every path of it, right? Taking our fears to him, right? How do we leave that separate worldview to the connection? It's coming to God and talking to him.
Yes. Yes. And if we keep those two great commandments the focus, we're first going to come to Jesus, and then we're going to turn outwardly and help those around us. Serve however we are, in whatever position we have been given in our lives, start there. If you're a mother, start by serving your children in a way that honors God, in the way that God speaks to you to nurture and to honor your children. If you are a teacher, it's about connecting with God and saying, in this gift that I've been given of this position as a teacher, help me to help them. Pour into me what you're asking me to pour into them. So, all of us have an influence to some degree. All of us have the same amount of time, believe it or not, in a day. All of us have these resources that are available to us every day. And as we turn to God first and say, God, let's get on the same page as far as what my calling is. Let's get on the same page about what this influence as a mother, as a teacher, as a friend, as an aunt, as whatever it is, get on the same page. And then who are those in your path who God is going to allow you to touch and to minister to? And then believing in God's abundance. In that state, you have to let go of control because God is going to ask you to do things outside of your comfort zone. Guarantee. The first couple times it might just be like, are you listening? Are you listening? And but pretty soon he's going to start asking you to stretch yourself. And it's not because he wants you to be miserable. It's because he wants you to break out of that box, that old paradigm, to expand your ability to receive, like we've been talking about. So, if any of you that are listening are thinking, well, how do I expand that little beaker of blessings that I have? How do I turn it into this entire punch bowl, right? How do I turn it into a swimming pool? How do I make that vessel wider? Well, this is how you do it. You connect with God and you get on the same page with Him with what you currently have. And then you pour God's grace into it. You allow yourself to be the vessel to do it. That literally widens your vessel. But you will have to get over the scarcity mentality by just doing it, by just believing it, even if you don't have the control of the outcome. Letting go of it, that it looks perfect, because it's not going to look perfect in the worldly sense, but it will look perfect to God because it will be the action He asks you to take. And then you totally are out of the state of self promotion and self protection because you literally have no clue what the outcome's going to be. There's no forethought of, oh, this is automatically going to launch me here. There's none of that. God is literally going to take you out of that. And He's going to say, yeah, but it's going to be so much better because now it's me and you, and you're not having to play this crazy game of navigating the empire. You totally bypass that worldview, and you're now working in eternal view. You're now working in abundance view. You're now working in kingdom view, this kingdom where we all are serving and blessing God's kingdom. So that will be asked of us. We will be asked to transform. And it's the most beautiful thing. But I can tell you it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. But I look at how restricted I used to feel. I used to think, well, God must not love me that much because obviously I'm getting punished repeatedly. But then I got to know who God is, and I started to really recognize God is pouring abundance into me, but I'm only receiving from this punitive, punishment oriented empire I live in. And so it really is about getting past that, coming to Jesus and really getting to know who He is. Because if you really seek for that, you should not be scared of what Jesus is going to tell you. You shouldn't be. There have been plenty of times Jesus has told me something and it's broken my brain and it's taken weeks for me to process. And I've just like sat there stupefied for a while. But that's okay. It's part of the process. It's part of the journey. It's part of the expanding our compassion. It's part of expanding our wisdom. It's part of expanding beyond this current worldview into a worldview and a testament of Jesus Christ that's going to last us forever.
I love it. It's not a one-time deal,
It's
right?
not.
This is journey. This is a relationship with Jesus Christ, and this is a trial. Take it with that curiosity. That's where I would encourage you to begin. That's where I'm sitting with this curiosity, with this mystery, and approaching it in a new way. And then really seeking to have that recognition where God is appearing in your life. When you follow the things that you're conversing and talking with Him, it's an experiment. Test it out. Recognize where He's leading you. But remember that we don't get one trial in life. It's an ongoing process. It's something we have to actively choose to as we approach this new way of interacting, this new way of thinking, as He's leading us and guiding us upon our journey, building upon each step. It is an active choice every day. The more that we recognize, the easier hopefully those steps will be. But throughout the scriptures, we hear time and time again where prophets and leaders are on the path and then they hit a stumbling block and they have to actively choose which path are they going to take. And the beauty is that whatever path we do take, as long as we come back, even if we're circling around a little bit, we come back to Christ, He's going to be there and say, let's go. Here we go again, right? His love and compassion is so much wider of a spectrum than our human minds can even comprehend. He has more love than we can actively give out. And that's the beauty of it. I think that this topic has been so enlightening, Nikki. Thank you for taking the time to share. I think there's more that we want to dig in. And so we will be coming back to this to talk a little bit more about some examples throughout the scriptures that talk about prophets' lives, leaders' lives, how they've learned to rely on this trust, how they've learned to live in a connection worldview instead of a separate worldview. That will give us a little bit more strength, compassion, and understanding of how the Lord has worked in the past and how he too can work individually in our own lives.